If I am that invisible Mark, then stop the car. I am going to disappear properly. Wait, do not go. Isabella Brooke spent years sitting in the place others chose for her, in the corner of parties behind the decisions. Left out of important conversations. That night, upon leaving a dinner on the Upper East Side, her husband put his mistress in the front seat and ordered his own wife to get in the back, as if that were just another minor humiliation. Mark believed Isabella would return home in silence, just like always. But in the middle of Park Avenue, she asked to get out. And what looked like a scene of jealousy was, in truth, the beginning of a downfall he never imagined. If I am that invisible, Mark, then I will disappear properly. The sentence left Isabella's mouth without a scream, without a tremor, without the theatricality that Mark Brooks expected from a wounded woman. The Blacktown car was still parked in front of the expensive Manhattan restaurant, with the valet holding the door open, and Chloe Jenkins already settled in the front seat, adjusting her hair as if that place had always belonged to her. Mark turned his face slowly, irritated by his wife's calm tone. "Do not start, Isabella," he muttered while checking the expensive watch on his wrist. "It is just a seat." Chloe smiled, looking through the sun visor mirror. Wow, Mark, she actually got offended. What an overreaction. Isabella kept her hand on the strap of her black purse, which held a slim, rigid portfolio that no one but her knew the weight of. "It is not about the seat," she said. Mark let out a short laugh. "Then what is it about me not feeding your drama?" Chloe tilted her head, faking sweetness. "Bella will ride in the back, just for today. We are running late." And it was in that sentence, in that intimate nicknames, spoken by a woman wearing the perfume Mark had bought with the family credit card, that Isabella understood that certain deaths make no noise. The driver, Paul, kept his eyes fixed straight ahead. Trained by years not to witness what he saw, the avenue shined under the lights of expensive restaurants. Beautiful people walked out laughing. Security guards closed doors. Glasses still clinked it behind the windows. Isabella looked at Mark, hoping for the last time that he would realize the petty violence of that gesture. He opened the back door with impatience, like someone opening a trunk to store something bothersome. "Get in, Isabella. I am not going to argue on the sidewalk," she asked almost in a whisper. "Do you really want me to go in the back?" Mark clenched his jaw. "I want you to stop acting like a child." Chloe turned her face just enough to show off her gold earrings, smiling at her own reflection. "Honey, let it go. She is used to making a scene when she is not the center of attention." Isabella felt the sentence touch an old place full of birthdays, where she had stayed by the tables serving guests. Family Sunday brunches, where Mark presented projects without mentioning that the first spreadsheets had been done by her. Trips where her seat was always whatever was left over. She got into the car, not out of obedience, but for confirmation. When the back door closed, the muffled sound isolated the three of them inside a capsule of leather, expensive perfume, and lies. Chloe reached out to the dashboard and changed the music without asking permission, choosing a song far too soft for the tension that was building. Mark looked through the rearview mirror, met Isabella's eyes, and looked away before she could say anything. "Let us go to the penthouse," he ordered the driver. "Stop in Midtown first," Isabella said. Mark frowned. "What?" She adjusted her cream coat over her knees, her fingers touching the stitching of her black purse. "I need to get out on the way." Chloe laughed, a light laugh rehearsed to sound superior. "You are going to call an Uber in the middle of the night just to prove a point." Mark did not turn his body. He only raised a hand in a gesture of exhaustion. "Isabella, you are not getting out. We are going home, and tomorrow you can talk when you are less sensitive." She looked at the back of his neck at that posture of a man used to being obeyed, even when he was wrong. "You still talk as if home is a place I have any desire to return to." For the first time, his silence lasted a second longer. The car moved through New York City with the elegant slowness of the rich, stuck in the same traffic that everyone pretended to master. The city lights cut the glass in golden streaks, and Isabella saw her reflection superimposed over Chloe's face in the front mirror. The mistress was 28 years old, calculated beauty, impeccable nails, a soft voice when there was an audience, and venomous when there was not. Mark had met her at a real estate launch event in Hudson Yards, calling her an image consultant, then a friend, then a person who understands my moment. Isabella never asked when she had become more than that. Not because she did not know, but because at a certain point, asking is offering the other person the chance to lie one more time. Isabella's cell phone vibrated inside her purse. On the screen, a short message from Helen Carter. "It is ready." She locked the device before the light could give anything away. Mark, through the rear-view mirror, noticed the movement. Who was that? Isabella put the phone away. "Nobody you have ever considered important." Chloe made a mocking sound. "Wow, how mysterious." Isabella answered without looking at her. "A mystery is when someone does not know. You are just late to the news." The sentence was not loud, but it changed the temperature in the car. Chloe straightened her spine, offended not by the insult, but by the lack of fear. Mark turned his face to the side. "Be careful with what you say." Isabella leaned her back against the rear seat and for a moment saw the scene as if she were outside her own body. The husband in the front seat, the mistress touching his arm, the wife in the back reflected in pieces of glass. How many times had she accepted being a reflection? In the first year of marriage, Mark said it was temporary. That he needed to maintain certain appearances in front of his mother, in front of the investors, in front of the partners. In the second, he started traveling without giving notice. In the third, Isabella stopped being invited to meetings where her own assets were cited as the moral guarantee of the Brooks family. In the fourth, Chloe appeared. In the fifth, Mark no longer hid his absolute lack of shame. "You are right," Isabella said. "I should be careful with what I say, which is why I waited so long." Mark exhaled sharply through his nose. "Waited for what? To threaten me?" She looked out the window as the car approached Midtown Manhattan. "No, Mark. To make sure I would not regret it, the driver turned on to Park Avenue, where the lit-up buildings looked like watchtowers over lives breaking apart discreetly. It was almost midnight, but New York still breathed through honking horns, motorcycles, headlights, and hurried footsteps. Isabella saw on the other side of the avenue the facade of a commercial building where a light remained on the 12th floor. Helen was there. The portfolio would also be ready, the filing, the asset freezes, the notifications, everything waiting for just one word from her. Mark received a call from his mother and rejected it irritably. Chloe used the gesture to touch his knee. "Honey, do not let her ruin the night. You promised we were going to stop by your penthouse." "Your penthouse?" Isabella almost smiled. It was impressive how some people moved into lies even before receiving the key. Mark murmured. "We are going." Then he looked again through the rearview mirror. "And you, Isabella, are going to stop this theater. Tomorrow we have lunch with my mother, and I do not want a sour face." Isabella tilted her head. "Does your mother know you put your mistress in the front seat and your wife in the back?" Chloe hurried to speak. "Your wife on paper, right?" Mark did not correct her. That was the final detail Isabella needed. She opened her purse calmly and took out her cell phone. The screen lit up her fingers, far too steady for a supposedly broken woman. Mark noticed this time with more attention. "What are you doing, Isabella?" She typed just one word to Helen. "Now then," she locked the screen. Chloe laughed, but there was a crack in her voice. "Are you going to post vague quotes? Are you going to send crying voice memos to some friend?" Isabella looked up and met her eyes in the mirror. "No, Chloe. Vague quotes are for those who still want to be understood." Mark turned partially against his seatbelt, his body restrained as if even the car was trying to stop him from facing the scene. "You are crossing the line," he said. Isabella answered, "I spent years letting you draw the lines. Today I just stepped out of the frame." Paul slowed down because of a traffic light. The red glow fell over the dashboard, over Mark's face, over Chloe's mouth, over Isabella's hands. "It felt like a warning," Mark said harshly. "Paul, keep driving." Isabella leaned forward and spoke with an authority the driver had never heard from her. "Paul, pull the car over." The man hesitated for less than a second, but that second revealed Mark's entire empire. Everyone obeyed him because they depended on him, because they were afraid of him, because it was easier. Mark slammed his hand on the armrest. I said, "Keep driving." Isabella did not raise her voice, "And I am asking to get out." Chloe finally turned around, abandoning the mask. "Are you really going to do this in the middle of Park Avenue? How ridiculous." Isabella opened her purse and held the black portfolio tight against her chest. What was ridiculous was taking so long to understand that there is no dignity in begging for a place next to someone who makes a point of putting you behind them. Mark looked at the portfolio, and something in him shifted. It was not guilt yet. It was the instinct of a threat. "What is in there?" she faced him. "The things you never opened because you thought I did not know how to read what I signed." The car pulled over near the sidewalk in front of a discreet commercial building with a lit security booth and a guard in a dark suit observing the street. Mark took off his seatbelt. "Isabella, give me that folder." She opened the door before he finished the sentence. The New York air rushed in cold, mixed with exhaust, concrete, and freedom. Isabella put one foot on the sidewalk and felt in an absurd way that her own body had weight again. For years, she had become too light in the hands of others, pushed from one room to another, from one excuse to another, from one silence to another. Now, holding the portfolio against her chest, she was heavy, real. Mark also got out of the car, irritated, his suit jacket open. He had the expression of someone who still believed walking fast was enough to regain control. "Get in the car." She closed the back door carefully. "No." Chloe remained in the front seat but rolled down the window. "Mark, let her go. In a little while she will regret it and call." Isabella looked at the mistress and for the first time that night felt pity. Not a sweet pity, a lucid pity. Chloe thought she had conquered the front seat, but did not realize she was sitting next to a man incapable of recognizing someone as a person once that person stopped serving him. Mark reached out his hand. "Are you going to embarrass me on the street?" Isabella answered, "No, I am just stopping hiding the embarrassment you built inside our home." He stopped a few steps from her. Struck not by the sentence, but by the calm with which it was said. Around them, no one knew who they were. A couple walked by in a hurry. A delivery guy waited for the light. The building security guard looked on discreetly. Without an audience, Mark seemed smaller. At parties, at brunches, in meetings, he always had someone to impress. There, under the white light of a commercial building, there was only the wife he had underestimated, and the portfolio he was beginning to fear. "Are you overreacting because of Chloe?" he said, trying to turn years into mere jealousy. Isabella shook her head. "Chloe is just the most recent name for your contempt." He swallowed hard. "Do you want money? Is that it? Do you want to negotiate?" This time she smiled. It was small, sad, and definitive. "Do you still think everything I lost is purchasable?" Her cell phone vibrated. Helen Carter appeared on the screen. Isabella answered without stepping away. "Helen, you can file it." Mark lost his color for a moment. "File what?" Isabella kept her eyes on him as she answered the lawyer. "Yes, the divorce and the asset freeze notifications too." The word divorce did not explode, it dropped heavy. Mark looked at the car, at Chloe, at the street as if looking for a way out that did not involve admitting he had not seen any of this coming. "You are bluffing," he said. But his voice no longer had the same firmness. Isabella hung up and put her phone away. "I bluffed for years when I said everything was fine." Chloe opened the passenger door and stepped out, pulling her tight dress down, her heels hitting the pavement with anger. "Mark, are you going to let her speak to you like that?" Isabella did not look at Mark. She looked at Chloe. "You wanted my place. Start by understanding one thing." He never knew what to do with a woman who did not fit into the spaces he chose. Chloe turned red. "You lost, Isabella." The wife took a deep breath like someone listening to a child repeat a taught phrase. "No, I just stopped competing for a prize that diminished me." Mark took a step forward. "You cannot simply end a marriage in the middle of the street." Isabella pressed the portfolio against her body. "I did not end it right now. You ended it every day. You put me in the back and called it normal." The building security guard approached the glass door upon recognizing Isabella. She had already been there 3 times in the last few months. Always at the end of the business day, always using discreet names at the reception, always walking in with the posture of someone who still did not want to destroy anything before being absolutely sure. On the first visit, she cried in the bathroom after handing over documents. On the second, she heard Helen say that patience without protection turns into a prison. On the third, she signed the authorization that would only be used when she decided it had come to an end. Now the end was standing on the street wearing expensive men's cologne and looking at her as if seeing her for the very first time. Mark lowered his voice. "Isabella, let us talk at home," she answered. "Home is where I can sit down without asking for permission." He closed his eyes for a second, irritated by his own impotence. "You are being cruel." The word almost hurt her, but it arrived too late. "Cruel was you teaching me to disappear and getting scared when I learned how." Chloe grabbed Mark's arm. "Let us go. She just wants attention." Isabella looked at that hand on her husband's suit jacket and did not feel jealousy. She felt relief. Jealousy would still be a form of belonging. The building door opened, and Helen Carter emerged in the elegant and serious lobby, holding a beige folder in her hands. She did not cross the sidewalk, nor did she dramatize the scene. She just waited, giving Isabella the dignity of walking away on her own. Mark saw the lawyer and finally understood he had been excluded from something. Not a conversation, but an entire preparation. "Did you plan this?" he asked, his voice now low, almost. Isabella answered, "I protected myself. There is a difference." He looked at the black portfolio. For how long? She thought of the forgotten birthdays, the nights she dined alone, the events where Mark asked her to arrive later, the photos where Chloe appeared, smiling next to him while Isabella was cropped out by the caption, "Long enough to stop being afraid of the day you would humiliate me again." Mark tried to touch her arm, but she pulled back before the contact. The gesture was small, but to him, devastating. Chloe noticed and for the first time looked at Mark, not as a trophy but as a risk. "Mark, what is she saying about a freeze?" Isabella walked past them toward the lobby entrance. "Ask him what really belongs to him." Mark stood motionless, as if the sentence had pulled the ground from under his feet. Chloe turned to him with narrowed eyes. "What does she mean?" He did not answer. He could not. Not there. Not without remembering that the Upper East Side penthouse had been bought with protected funds from Isabella's family, that the car used that night was tied to an asset structure he had always treated as an extension of his own, that the credibility of Brooks' development came from his wife's silent last name on old contracts he never bothered to read to the end. Isabella stopped at the building door and looked one last time at the car. The front seat was empty, the door now open, the music still playing softly. For years she had thought that being chosen for that seat would prove something. That night, she understood that no place offered by Mark was worth more than her own exit. Helen touched her shoulder lightly. "Are you sure?" Isabella breathed. The pain did not disappear. It just stopped giving the orders. "I am." Then she entered the building without looking back. Outside, Mark still waited for her to return. He waited 10 seconds, then 30, then a whole minute, as if time could obey the same tone his employees, his family, and his drivers obeyed. Chloe was speaking next to him, but her voice seemed distant. "Mark, you need to fix this. She cannot freeze anything, right, Mark?" He stared at the glass door where Isabella had disappeared, and for the first time in years, did not know what order to give. The city continued its indifferent night. A bus drove by, a motorcycle accelerated, the light turned green. Paul, still inside the car, did not ask if he should drive on. Mark reached into his pocket, took out his cell phone, and found 10 new messages in the Brooks family group text. The first was from his mother, saying she had received a notification from Isabella's lawyer. The second came from the CFO of the company. "We need to talk urgently tomorrow morning." The third was from an unknown number. It brought only a formal notice. Mark read the word dissolution and tasted the dry flavor of fear. Inside the building, in the elevator rising to the 12th floor, Isabella closed her eyes for a moment. It was not a victory yet. No. It was just the first minute of a life where no one else would decide where she should sit. Isabella did not cry in the elevator of the Midtown commercial building. The narrow mirror reflected a pale woman in a cream coat, holding a black portfolio against her chest as if holding the last whole pieces of herself. Helen Carter stood beside her in silence, respecting the kind of pain that does not accept comfort before accepting its own truth. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, the reception area was empty, illuminated by discreet lamps and the cold glow of computers still on. It was almost midnight, but the office looked prepped for surgery. On the conference room table, there were organized documents, a cup of black coffee, Helen's open laptop, and an envelope with Isabella Brooks's name in sober lettering. "We can still wait until tomorrow morning," the lawyer said, not as a doubt but as a final opportunity for regret. Isabella placed the portfolio on the table. "I waited 5 years." Helen watched her fingers let go of the strap slowly as if dropping a rope. "Then let us begin." Isabella nodded, and only in that moment did she realize her right hand was trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. While Helen reviewed the authorization, Isabella walked to the window. Down below, the avenue remained alive, indifferent to the end of a marriage. Headlights streaked the street. People hurried across crosswalks. Glass buildings reflected other glass buildings as if New York were a city made of mirrors where no one wanted to see their own loneliness. Her cell phone vibrated for the first time. "Mark." She stared at the screen until the call dropped. It vibrated again. "Mark." Then a text message. "Get in the car right now." Isabella locked the screen without replying. Helen, seated at the table, did not take her eyes off the papers. "He will try to frame your decision as an impulse. Then he will try to frame it as jealousy, then as financial interest. It is important that you do not feed into that narrative." Isabella let out a short breath, almost a humorless laugh. "He has already started." The lawyer pushed the first document forward. "This is the divorce petition. This other one communicates the revocation of administrative authorizations over private assets. We are not doing anything beyond what was already planned and documented." Isabella read the first line. Her name looked strange there, so formal, so whole. She signed. The pen scratched the paper with a small but definitive sound. On the ground floor, Mark was still standing next to the car when he received the first official notification on his cell phone. He did not understand it immediately. There were too many words, too much legal jargon, and he had always despised what he considered backstage bureaucracy. That was the work of assistants, accountants, lawyers, people paid to keep his life running without him having to dirty his hands with details. Chloe tried to read over his shoulder, impatient. "What is that? Did she really file for divorce?" Mark shoved the phone into his pocket forcefully. "It is a pressure tactic. She wants to scare me," but his face said otherwise. Paul, the driver, remained in his seat, hands on the wheel, pretending not to hear. Chloe crossed her arms. "Then let us go to the penthouse. You can call her from there, or better yet, let her sleep alone. And tomorrow she will come back begging." Mark looked at the building door where Isabella had entered. Anger helped him breathe. "She always comes back." He said it as if it were a law of physics. Chloe smiled, regaining her confidence. "Then come on. I am not going to stand on the sidewalk because of wife drama." He got into the car, but as he sat down, he noticed the empty back seat through the rearview mirror. For the first time, the emptiness felt larger than her presence. The ride to the Upper East Side penthouse was short and heavy. Chloe talked almost the entire way. First mocking Isabella, then demanding guarantees, then trying to sound understanding when she noticed Mark was no longer laughing. "She was always cold to me, you know," she said, touching his arm. "I just wanted you to be happy without that heavy energy inside the house." Mark responded with a vague noise in his head. Images blended together. Isabella walking into the building. Helen Carter waiting in the lobby. The word freeze appearing in the message. The phrase "ask him what really belongs to him." He knew that apartment like he knew his own reflection. He had brought partners there to drink, hosted investors, let Chloe sleep in Italian sheets, all while telling himself Isabella would not care if she did not know. When the car stopped in front of the building, the night doorman stepped out of the booth with an uncomfortable expression. "Good evening, Mr. Brooks." Mark stepped out, already annoyed. "Open the garage." The doorman swallowed hard. "Sir, there was an access registry update a few minutes ago. Your access is temporarily suspended until confirmed by the owner." Chloe blinked. "What do you mean, owner?" Mark felt the blood rush to his face. "Do you know who you are talking to? Robert?" The doorman lowered his eyes. "I do, sir, which is why I'm informing you with respect." The scene in front of the building was more humiliating for Mark, exactly because it was discreet. There was no yelling. There were no cameras pointed at them. There was no audience other than Chloe, Paul, and a doorman who wanted to disappear inside his own uniform. The building with its elegant facade, vertical garden, and warm lighting at the entrance remained impassive. Mark pulled out his cell phone, called the condo property manager, and heard the call drop. He called again. Nothing. Chloe took a step back, her face losing its triumphant glow. "Mark, this apartment is in her name." He turned around impatiently. "It is in a family trust. It is not that simple." Chloe laughed, but without humor. Her family trust. The question hit his pride. "You do not understand these things." She narrowed her eyes. "I understand when I am being left on the sidewalk." The doorman tried to soften the blow. "Sir, you can leave a message or wait for authorization in the morning." Mark almost exploded, but there was something in the word authorization that hit him directly. His whole life he authorized. He permitted. He chose who entered, who sat down, who stayed. Now in the building where he felt like the master, it was Isabella's name that opened or closed the door. In the Midtown office, Isabella received the confirmation from the property manager without showing surprise. Helen put the phone on speaker just enough for her to hear the employee report that the access registry had been updated according to the filed documentation. "Thank you, Rachel," Helen said. "Keep everything in writing." When the call ended, Isabella kept staring at the table. The reaction she expected from herself was a greater relief, perhaps a sense of justice. But what came was a deep, almost physical sadness. That apartment had been chosen by her, before Mark turned every corner into a display of power. She remembered the first time she walked in there, still without furniture, imagining small dinners, books in the living room, Sunday mornings with slow-brewed coffee. Mark talked about hosting investors, his mother talked about property appreciation, and little by little, the dreamed home became a backdrop for negotiations. Helen noticed the shadow on her face. "Do you want to pause this part?" Isabella shook her head. "No, I am just burying a house that never got the chance to exist." The lawyer closed one of the folders. "Then today you did not lose a home. You took back a key." Isabella looked at the window again, and for the first time that night the sentence found a place inside her. Mark ended up taking Chloe to a luxury hotel in Tribeca, which only made everything worse. On the way, she did not touch him again, sitting by the window, her cell phone in hand, sending rapid messages he could not read. Upon arriving, she refused the smaller suite offered by the front desk and waited for Mark to handle it with the corporate card. The card was declined on the first attempt. The clerk kept his professional smile. That trained American customer service smile, designed to protect the client from their own shame. "Perhaps another card, sir." Mark felt Chloe looking at him. He used a personal card that went through, but the damage was already done. In the hotel elevator, Chloe spoke quietly. "You told me she had no control over anything." Mark stared at the climbing numbers. "I said she was not involved." Chloe turned her face to him. "That is different." He did not answer because it was Isabella was not involved, because he had pushed her away, or because she had let him believe that. The second possibility was unbearable. In the suite, Chloe took off her earrings and threw them on the counter. "I need to know exactly what is going on. I am not going to be dragged into a petty marital war." Mark laughed bitterly. "You were very comfortable when you thought it was a victory," she replied quickly. "And you were very comfortable when you thought your wife was a piece of expensive furniture." Chloe's sentence should have irritated him coming from her, but it hurt because it felt true. Mark went to the window of the suite and saw New York spread out in cold lights. He tried to call Isabella one more time. Voicemail. He sent a text. You crossed the line. Tomorrow we will talk calmly. He deleted it, wrote another. Do not do anything that ruins us both. He deleted that too. Finally he typed, answer me, and hit send. The message went unanswered. In the Brooks family group text, his mother demanded explanations. His younger brother sent question marks. The CFO of the real estate firm asked for an urgent meeting at 8 a.m. Mark sat in the armchair, the phone heavy in his hand. For the first time, he remembered a night 2 years ago when Isabella tried to show him a spreadsheet regarding asset protections. He was on the phone with a partner and had said without looking at her, "Leave that to the people who understand it." She gathered the papers in silence. At the time, her silence seemed like agreement. Now it looked like an archive. Chloe walked out of the bathroom with her perfect makeup removed, wearing a hotel bathrobe. "Are you going to sleep?" she asked. Mark answered no, and it was the first honest answer he gave that night. Isabella did not sleep either. After signing what was necessary, she declined Helen's offer to call a car and asked only for a few minutes alone in the conference room. She sat in front of the empty table, took a thin wedding band out of her purse and placed it next to the pen. It was not a theatrical gesture. No one was filming. No one would applaud. She just needed to see the metal off her finger to believe her skin was still her own. Her cell phone vibrated with Mark's message. "Answer me." Isabella read it and felt an old urge to explain, to justify, to soften the blow so he would not hate her so much. That was the hardest addiction to break, protecting the one who hurt her so as not to seem cruel. Helen returned with a cup of tea and saw the lit screen. "You do not have to answer tonight." Isabella smiled tiredly. "I know the problem is convincing the part of me that spent years answering even before being called." The lawyer sat across from her. "Tomorrow he will try to arrange a meeting. Maybe he will use his mother, maybe the company. You need to decide which door you want to keep closed." Isabella looked at the wedding band, the ultimate key he used to enter without asking. By morning, the news was already circulating within the Brooks family even before reaching the papers. It was not public news. Not yet. But wealthy families had their own system of leaks. Secretaries, drivers, building managers, financial assistants, outraged mothers, and cousins who feigned discretion in group texts. Mark arrived at the Brooks Development headquarters in Hudson Yards, unshaven and with the hard eyes of someone who had not slept. The glass building reflected a gray sky, and the coffee served at reception tasted as bitter as always. But nothing seemed to follow the usual rhythm. His CFO, Greg, was waiting in the office with an open folder. "Mark, we received notifications regarding 3 sensitive points: property access, vehicle use, and the review of guarantees tied to old contracts." Mark threw his jacket over the back of the chair. "Guarantees tied to what?" Greg took a deep breath. "To assets linked to Mrs. Isabella." Her name spoken in that environment felt like an invasion. Mark narrowed his eyes. "She is not part of the company." Greg chose his words carefully. "Formally, no, but some trust instruments used in family negotiations required her consent. Without that consent, we have to review everything." Mark felt a heat rise up his neck. For years he had called Isabella absent. Now, he discovered that her absence propped up the very walls of the room where he gave orders. His mother's call came before he could respond. Eleanor Brooks did not ask if it was a good time. She never asked, "Mark, what kind of embarrassment is this?" Isabella's lawyer sent a notice to the penthouse management. "You let your wife act like a stranger against her own family." Mark closed his eyes. "Mother, I am handling it." On the other end, her voice came sharp, elegant, and cruel within socially acceptable limits. "Handle it fast and do not tell me this has anything to do with that girl." He looked at Greg, who pretended to analyze some papers. "Chloe has nothing to do with this." Eleanor let out a dry laugh. "Men always say that when a woman has everything to do with it." The phrase irritated him because it came from someone who had spent years minimizing Isabella, calling her discretion coldness, her polite manners a lack of brilliance, her silence a weakness. You never liked her, Mark said. Eleanor answered without hesitation. But I knew she had utility. You apparently forgot even that. The word utility struck him strangely. The night before, Isabella had not asked for love. She had asked to get out of the car, perhaps because she already knew that in that family, love always came second to function. Late in the morning, Isabella walked into a discreet coffee shop in Tribeca, wearing a different coat, her hair pulled back, and a fresh face. Helen accompanied her, but stayed a few steps behind to take a call. The city seemed crew normal. Executives spoke loudly on their phones. A woman read messages while stirring her cappuccino. Two young men discussed a presentation on a laptop. Isabella ordered a black coffee and a butter croissant, just like she did on days when she needed to remember something simple. Before sitting down, she saw in the glass reflection a version of herself that did not look victorious or destroyed. She looked in transit. Helen approached with a serious expression. He asked for a meeting this afternoon. Isabella was not surprised. With me, with you, with me, and his lawyer at the company. Isabella ran her finger along the edge of the cup. At his company where he feels bigger. Helen waited. Do you want to decline? Isabella looked out at the street. At the cars stuck in traffic, at the buildings where so many decisions were made, by people who called feelings a weakness until they were defeated by them. No, I will go. Helen raised an eyebrow. Isabella finished her thought, but not to negotiate my return. I am going to hand him back the portfolio he never opened. At 3 in the afternoon, Mark was in his office when the receptionist announced Isabella had arrived. He stood up too fast and hated himself for doing so. He adjusted his jacket, put his face back in order, and told them to come in. The door opened first for Helen Carter, then for Isabella. She did not wear flashy jewelry. She brought no tears. She did not look like a desperate wife. She carried the same black portfolio. Mark saw that and felt anger at his own reaction. You could have answered my calls, he said before even greeting her. Isabella looked around the room at the diplomas, the architectural models, the view of Hudson Yards, the desk where he had hosted so many times. Everyone except her. I could have, but yesterday you taught me that I functioned better in silence. Greg, present at Mark's request, lowered his eyes. Mark's lawyer cleared his throat. Helen remained impassive. Mark pointed to the chair across from his desk. Sit down. Isabella did not move for a second. Just 1 second. Everyone understood the weight of that phrase. Sit down. As if he were still the one assigning places. She then pulled out the chair but did not sit. She placed the portfolio on his desk and said, Today, Mark, you are going to read before you send someone to the back. The meeting had no yelling at the start. It had documents, general clauses, dates, revoked authorizations, and a kind of awkwardness that men accustomed to winning hate because they do not know what to do with their hands. Helen explained that Isabella was not seeking to destroy the company, but to protect private assets and remove her name from operations used without emotional or marital transparency. Mark's lawyer tried to argue that such swift measures could be seen as aggressive. Isabella answered for Helen could. Aggressive was using my stability to prop up decisions from which I was excluded. Mark gripped his pen tightly. You never asked to participate. Isabella looked at him, and the pain showed not as a weakness but as evidence. I asked. In the first year, you said it was men's business. In the second, I sent reports by email. You replied with a thumbs-up emoji. In the third, your mother said a good wife does not embarrass her husband with numbers. In the fourth, Chloe started showing up at events where I was uninvited. In the fifth, you put me in the back seat. The silence after that filled the entire room. Mark opened his mouth, but no sentence seemed big enough to cover 5 years. It was Greg who accidentally planted the next crack. While flipping through a copy of the documents, he frowned and said, Mark, I need to confirm something. Did Chloe have access to any of this information? Mark turned to him. Of course not, Greg hesitated. The thing is, some internal inquiries about real estate and guarantees were made 2 weeks ago using a visitor badge linked to your guest list. Isabella stood perfectly still. Helen wrote something down. Mark felt his stomach drop. That is impossible. But a memory surfaced against his will. Chloe alone in his office saying she would wait while he went down for a quick meeting. Chloe spinning in his chair. Chloe asking with fake casualness why Isabella still appeared on so many documents if she did not do anything. At the time he thought it was cute. Now her laugh took on another sound. Isabella noticed the change in his face. She did not celebrate. That perhaps hurt more. You did not have to believe me, she said, but you chose to believe anyone who confirmed the version where I was small. Mark lowered his eyes to the open portfolio. For the first time, he actually read it. When Isabella left the company, the New York sky was beginning to darken behind the buildings. Mark did not walk her to the elevator, maybe out of pride, maybe because his legs would not obey. Helen walked beside her in silence. But before getting into the elevator, Isabella stopped and looked down the hallway where employees pretended not to watch. She did not feel shame. She felt the weight of being seen after so much time being invisible. Inside the office, Mark remained seated, staring at the black portfolio as if it were an object left by a stranger. His cell phone vibrated. Chloe. He did not answer. It vibrated again. His mother, he did not answer. The third time, a message from Chloe appeared on the screen. Did you fix it? Can I go back to the penthouse tonight? Mark read it, and for the first time, the question seemed grotesque. Outside, Isabella stepped into the elevator and Helen asked, "Are you okay?" Isabella took a moment to answer, "No." The doors began to close, "But I am whole." And as the elevator descended the glass tower in Hudson Yards, she understood that she did not need to return the same way to prove she had survived. She just needed not to return to the same place. Mark did not go home that night, because for the first time, he did not know which home he could still call his own. He stayed late in his office at Brooks Development, with the black portfolio open on the desk and the lights of Manhattan blinking on the other side of the glass, as if the city were mocking his old certainties. He read documents he had never had the patience to read, and every page seemed written in a cruel language. Consent, revocation, private assets, indirect administration, marital authorization, all of that existed. It had been under his nose for years while he called Isabella distant. Greg left after 8 p.m., leaving a quiet warning. "Mark, we need to handle this carefully. It is not just a divorce, it is institutional trust." Trust. The word kept throbbing. At 9 p.m., Chloe showed up unannounced, wearing a dark green dress, and the expression of someone coming to collect on a promise. "You did not answer my calls," she said, walking in as if she still had a right to the space. Mark closed the portfolio sharply. "Who authorized your entry?" She stopped, surprised by his tone. "You always authorize it." He realized too late how that sentence had sounded like the key to all his mistakes. Chloe tried to smile, but the smile did not reach her eyes. She approached the desk, touched the cover of the black portfolio, and asked, "Did she manage to scare you with some paper?" Mark pulled the folder out of her reach. The gesture was small, but Chloe understood it. "Now you are going to treat me like an intruder." He took a deep breath, too tired for seduction, too irritated for politeness. "You accessed information about real estate and assets using a visitor badge." The question hit her face before she could prepare an answer. Chloe blinked, then laughed, offended. "You are accusing me because your wife decided to play vindictive lawyer." Mark did not answer, and his silence was worse. She crossed her arms. "I just wanted to understand why her name was on everything. You kept saying Isabella did nothing, but everything depended on her. I had a right to know what I was getting into." He looked up. "A right?" Chloe leaned forward. "Yes, all right. You brought me into this story. You took me to the dinners. You introduced me to your friends. You let me sit next to you. Do not pretend I forced the door open." Mark heard the sentence, and for the first time saw that Chloe was not just an external temptation. She was the vulgar reflection of the authority he himself exercised. The next morning, Eleanor called an emergency lunch at the Brooks family estate in Greenwich. She did not call it a meeting because wealthy families rarely admit they are gathering to manage emotional disasters. They call it lunch, coffee, a chat. any word that hides the intention of cornering someone with silver cutlery in hand. Isabella received the invitation via group text from her sister-in-law. A carefully neutral message. Mother thinks it is best we all talk before this escalates. Helen advised caution, but Isabella decided to go, not for Mark, not for Eleanor, but for herself. She wore a light pantsuit, pulled her hair into a low bun, and carried only a smaller folder without her wedding ring. Before leaving the temporary apartment where she had spent the night, she looked at her bare finger. There was a pale mark on the skin, an almost invisible circle that moved her more than she expected. It was not missing the ring, it was proof that even what hurts leaves a shape when it stays too long. She touched the mark once and whispered, "Enough." Then she went downstairs. The Greenwich estate looked the same as always. Tall gates, impeccable gardens, bright marble, silent staff, and a dining room where every floral arrangement seemed chosen to prevent honest conversations. Eleanor Brooks sat at the head of the table, elegant in a navy blue dress, with discreet pearls and a judging gaze. Mark stood by the window, unsure if he should approach. Chloe was not at the table, which Isabella noticed immediately. In that family, excluding someone was also a way of speaking. Mark's brother Ryan scrolled through his phone looking uncomfortable. His sister-in-law, Lauren, avoided eye contact. Eleanor opened the conversation before the appetizers were served. "Isabella, you could have come to us before involving lawyers." Isabella sat down slowly in the chair a staff member pulled out for her. It was not the chair next to Mark. For the first time, that did not hurt. "I came to you for years, Eleanor, but when I came as a wife, you called me sensitive. When I came with documents, you started listening." Eleanor squeezed her napkin in her lap. "Watch your tone." Isabella looked at her calmly. "It was exactly that advice that brought me here." Mark took a step forward. "Mother, maybe it is better if I talk to her first." Eleanor raised her hand, stopping him. Her authority was old, older than the marriage, older than the guilt. "No, this situation affects the family." Isabella smiled without joy. "Funny. When I was humiliated, it was a couple's issue. When I protect myself, it becomes a family issue." Ryan looked up from his phone and Lauren let out a breath as if someone had finally said a forbidden sentence. Eleanor maintained her posture. "You know Mark has flaws, but you also know that a smart wife does not destroy her husband's reputation out of pride." Isabella felt something cold rise in her chest. Not anger, clarity. A smart wife also does not allow her signature, her inheritance, and her silence to be used to prop up a life where she is treated like an unwanted guest. Mark closed his eyes for a second. Lunch had not even started, and he already wanted everyone to leave. But Isabella did not raise her voice. That was the worst part. Every word fit perfectly into the room. Eleanor sat down her water glass carefully. "Are you insinuating this family took advantage of you?" Isabella turned her face to her mother-in-law. She remembered the first Christmas after the wedding, when Eleanor complimented her dress, only to say right after that discreet women lasted longer in important families. She remembered the afternoon she tried to accompany Mark to a meeting, and heard her mother-in-law say, "Do not." She remembered the day Chloe showed up at a charity gala, and Eleanor pretended not to notice her hand on Mark's arm. "I am not insinuating," she answered. "I am describing." The silence that followed made even the silverware seem loud. Mark finally approached. "Isabella, I made mistakes, but you are turning everything into a war." She looked at him, and for a moment the sadness pierced her armor. "No, Mark. A war requires two sides attacking." "I spent years just trying not to bleed in front of the guests." He stood frozen. Eleanor looked away for the first time. The dining room door opened before anyone could answer, and Chloe walked in unannounced, carrying a small designer bag and a smile that tried to look innocent. "Sorry I am late," she said as if she had been invited. Eleanor's face hardened in a way that even Mark noticed. "Chloe, this is a family lunch." The young woman kept her smile. "That is exactly why I thought it was important to be here. After all, a lot is being said about me." Isabella showed no surprise. Helen had warned her that scared people tend to invade places where they were not called. Mark muttered, "Chloe, not now." She ignored him, walking over to the table and standing behind an empty chair. Not sitting, but taking up space. I just think it is unfair for Isabella to play the victim when everyone knows this marriage has been over for a long time. Isabella stared at the woman who the night before had sat in the front seat like someone receiving a crown. Over, yes. The difference is that I respected it even as a corpse. You wanted to move into it. Ryan coughed to hide a reaction. Lauren lowered her head. Chloe lost her smile for a second. Mark tried to intervene, but Chloe was already too wounded to back down. You talk about respect, but you were preparing documents behind your husband's back. Isabella answered. Behind his back? I was in the back. Remember, that was the place you all chose for me. The sentence shot across the table with precision. Eleanor looked at Mark and shame appeared on his face like a stain he could not scrub off. Chloe gripped the strap of her bag. You always had everything, a name, money, status. I had to fight to get close to someone like Mark. Isabella tilted her head slightly. So what you wanted was not love, it was access. Chloe laughed now without any politeness. As if you are not doing all this for money. Before Isabella could answer, Lauren spoke for the first time quietly but audibly. Chloe, you asked me at the dinner last month if properties in Isabella's name could be transferred after a divorce. The room stopped. Chloe turned slowly toward her. I asked out of curiosity. Lauren swallowed hard but did not back down. You said Mark needed to break free before she closed the doors. Mark looked at Chloe as if that sentence had pulled open a dark drawer. Chloe turned red, then pale. You misunderstood. Ryan put his phone down on the table. I also heard similar comments. I thought it was a joke. Eleanor, who until then had viewed Chloe as a manageable inconvenience, began to see her as a threat. What kind of comments? Chloe breathed quickly. You are all doing this because she showed up with a lawyer and paper. I just tried to protect Mark from a woman who was clearly planning to take everything. Isabella felt the temptation to destroy Chloe right there. To list every humiliation, every message, every deleted invitation, every photo she was cropped out of. But she realized the room was waiting for exactly that, an explosion that would allow them to call her unhinged, so she chose something else. She opened the smaller folder and took out a key. She placed it in the center of the table. This is the key to your house in the Hamptons that Mark used last summer without telling me. This is the copy of the garage remote for the penthouse. And this is the access card to the suite where Chloe believed she would sleep last night. Mark stiffened. Chloe swallowed hard. Isabella continued. I did not come to take anything. I came to return what you always treated as if it were yours. Eleanor looked at the keys as if they were a physical insult. Do you want to humiliate us? Isabella shook her head. No. I want to stop you from continuing to use me while silently calling me useless. Mark rubbed his face. I never called you useless. Her answer came fast but sad. You did not have to, you kept me out of the decisions, out of the events, out of the front seat, out of your life. There are words that only serve to give sound to what has already been done. He tried to hold her gaze but could not do it for long. Chloe, desperate to regain ground, pointed at the keys. That is emotional blackmail. She wants to make you feel guilty. Isabella put the empty folder away. Guilt is his business. Consequences are my business. For the first time, Eleanor could not find an immediate response. Ryan looked at his brother with a mix of pity and irritation. Lauren looked relieved and scared. Lunch was never served. The food grew cold somewhere in the kitchen, waiting for a normally that would not return. Mark followed Isabella into the hallway when she stood up to leave. She did not ask his mother for permission to be excused. She did not look at Chloe. She simply left. The marble hallway lined with old photographs of the Brooks family looked like a museum of men who had always stood in the center of the portraits. Isabella walked unhurried, and Mark only caught up to her near the foyer. Isabella. She stopped but did not turn around immediately. I did not know you felt this way. The sentence came out weak and they both knew it. When she finally looked at him, there was immense fatigue in her eyes. You did not know because you did not want to know. I left notes. I sent emails. I stayed quiet at dinners. I cried in your mother's bathroom. I went home alone. I waited for you to ask. You called it all a phase. Mark pressed his lips together. And now what do you want me to do? Isabella almost laughed, not out of cruelty but at the irony. Even in regret, he wanted an instruction he could execute and close the case on. Nothing that can be fixed today. That is the part you cannot stand. He took a small step. I can cut Chloe out of my life, Isabella answered. That is the bare minimum, not a reparation. The sentence cut him deeper than a scream. Mark looked back and saw Chloe in the distance, standing at the entrance to the dining room, watching them with hatred and fear. He also saw his mother standing perfectly still, calculating the damage. For the first time, he understood that he had confused control with strength, obedience with love, silence with peace. I did not want to lose you, he said, and the confession seemed far too late to be beautiful. Isabella held her purse against her body, not as a shield but as a boundary. You wanted to keep me. Losing is something else. He had no answer. Outside, her driver, called by Helen, was already waiting at the gate. Isabella walked to the exit, but before stepping through the main door, she turned around one last time. Yesterday, when I asked to get out of the car, you thought it was drama. Today, when I give back the keys, you think it is revenge. Maybe one day you will understand that there are women who only leave when they have already tried to stay in every possible way. Mark stood in the foyer surrounded by family portraits, and for the first time none of them seemed to protect him. In the car taking her back to the city, Isabella sat in the back seat by her own choice. That difference almost made her cry. There was no Chloe in the front. There was no Mark dictating the destination. There was no voice telling her to stop overreacting. The driver asked if she wanted to go to Helen's office or to the temporary apartment. Isabella looked out the window at the tree-lined streets of Greenwich, fading away, and thought of the keys on the table. Eleanor's face, Lauren's comment, the broken look in Mark's eyes. To the office, she said there was still a lot to do. On her cell phone, there was a new message from Helen. The internal inquiry made by Chloe was confirmed. We have the log. Isabella closed her eyes for a moment. The knot tightened, not out of surprise, but confirmation. A part of her had wished to be wrong about everyone, but being right at that point was what kept her alive. Back at the mansion, Chloe tried to explain something no one else seemed willing to hear. Mark, alone in the hallway, opened his phone and looked at an old photo of him and Isabella in the Hamptons before everything rotted. She was smiling next to him, not behind him, next to him, and that destroyed him more than any document. The confirmation regarding Chloe's search arrived at Helen Carter's office shortly after 4:00 p.m., accompanied by internal logs, timestamps, visitor ID, and the name of the employee who had unlocked Mark's office for a few minutes. It was not explosive proof, the kind that ruined someone in scandalous headlines. For Chloe, it was worse. It was a discreet, organized, bureaucratic sequence, almost devoid of emotion, showing that she had not just sat in the front seat out of vanity. She had been looking for open doors. Helen spread the copies on the table while Isabella stood looking at every line without touching the paper. This does not prove a crime on its own, the lawyer said, careful as always, but it proves intent, persistence, and a contradiction to her version of events. Isabella nodded. I do not want to turn this into a spectacle. Helen looked up. You have the right to defend yourself. Isabella wrapped her fingers around her purse strap. Defense? Yes. Spectacle? No. I spent years being treated as an extra. I am not going to become the main attraction in other people's dirt. The decision was clean, but not light. It demanded a strength from her that no one would applaud. The next morning, Mark called an emergency meeting at Brooks Development. Officially, it was to review the financial and legal impacts. In practice, it was a desperate attempt to gather the pieces before suspicion infected investors, family, and the board. The main conference room in Hudson Yards, with its long dark wood table and glass walls, felt colder than usual. Greg was already seated with financial reports. Mark's lawyer flipped through a gray folder. Ryan occupied a side chair, and Eleanor showed up dressed in light tones. As if elegance could absolve years of manipulation. Chloe arrived too. Despite no one confirming if she had been invited, she walked in with firm heels, flawless hair, a designer bag, and a tense smile. Mark saw her and did not hide his discomfort. "This meeting is not for you," she answered in a low but calculated voice. "If you are going to talk about me, I have a right to be present." Eleanor looked at her sons, then at the young woman, and for the first time there was no condescension on her face. There was calculation. Chloe, noticing this, sat down anyway. She still believed that taking up space was the same as belonging. Isabella arrived 5 minutes later, accompanied by Helen. She did not wear battle armor. She did not wear red. She did not wear jewelry demanding attention. She wore a simple, elegant ivory suit and held a beige portfolio, not the black one. That difference irritated Mark irrationally, because the black folder had already become the symbol of what he did not understand. The beige one seemed to say there was more, that the story did not end where he thought it did. When Isabella walked in, some people stood out of belated politeness. She greeted the room with a short nod and sat opposite Mark, not in the chair he pointed to, but the one she chose before he even spoke. The detail did not go unnoticed. Greg looked down, Ryan crossed his arms, Chloe pressed her lips together, Mark cleared his throat. "Let us keep this objective." Isabella looked at him. "Being objective would have saved us 5 years." Helen opened the folder. "We are here to align 3 points: marital separation, the use of private assets, and the cessation of unauthorized access to financial information." Chloe let out a short laugh. "Unauthorized access. How convenient." Helen did not flinch. "Convenient is a curious word, Miss Jenkins. The logs show your visitor badge was used to search real estate data, and guarantees tied to Mrs. Isabella on a day. Mr. Brooks was out of the office." The silence was immediate. Chloe straightened her posture. "I did not search for anything. Maybe someone used my badge." Greg took a deep breath. "The security cameras show you entering the office and remaining alone for 9 minutes. Mark turned his face slowly toward her. Chloe tried to back her lie with indignation. "I was waiting for Mark. I messed around on the desk tablet without knowing it was anything important." Isabella spoke for the first time, without raising her voice. "You asked Lauren if properties in my name could be transferred after a divorce, before you even knew I would ask for a divorce." Chloe opened her mouth, closed it, then attacked because any woman would realize you were planning something. "You are no saint." Isabella agreed with a slight nod. "I am not. I am just the person you underestimated because you were too busy trying to take my place." Mark ran his hand over his forehead. There was no clean defense for that. Mark's lawyer tried to regain control, talking about avoiding personal accusations and protecting the company's image. Helen agreed coldly. "Exactly. For that reason, my client chose not to take this issue to the press." Chloe's eyes widened. "What do you mean, the press?" The question revealed more fear than she intended. Isabella looked at her, and in that look there was no pleasure. "You walked into this room expecting me to scream, to cry, to look crazy. I am not going to give you that." Chloe laughed, but her voice cracked. "How generous," Isabella continued. "It is not generosity, it is a boundary. I do not need to drag my name through the mud to prove you touched what you shouldn't have." Eleanor, silent until then, intervened with a voice lower than usual. "And what do you want, Isabella?" The question came late, but it came. Isabella turned to her mother-in-law. "I want the immediate removal of my name from any Brooks family operation. Written confirmation that my private assets will no longer be used as collateral for the company's ability, and the return of all access linked to properties I own." Eleanor tightened her grip. "That weakens the family." Isabella answered, "No, it just reveals how much you leaned on someone you claimed you did not need." The sentence cut across the room cleanly. Greg did not argue. Ryan looked away. Mark sat completely still. And for a moment Isabella saw in him not the arrogant husband, but the boy raised to believe that losing control was the same as dying. That realization did not erase the damage. It just made it sadder. He finally spoke. "I did not know the company relied on it so heavily." Greg answered before Isabella could. "It relied on the confidence generated by the stability of the marriage and indirect guarantees." It was not operational reliance, but reputational. And reputation. Mark also crashes. Mark closed his fist on the table. Chloe muttered. So she is destroying everything out of revenge. Isabella turned to her. I am just removing my body from under the house before it collapses on me. Helen slid a document forward. Here is the formal proposal. There is no abuse of demand. There is no public exposure. There is no attempt to take over the company. Just a separation of liabilities. Mark's lawyer read it, and his silence was more clarifying than any protest. There was no legal overreach there, just precision. Chloe realized she was losing the narrative and did what she had always done when her beauty, charm, and fake fragility failed. She tried to play the victim. She stood up, her eyes shining with contained anger. It is very easy for all of you to judge me. You were all born with last names, money, protection. I had to learn how to survive. Mark came to me because he was unhappy. He said he was lonely in that marriage, that Isabella was cold, that she did not care about him. Mark closed his eyes in shame. Isabella remained seated. Chloe pointed at her. Do you think you suffered because you sat in the back seat one night? I spent my entire life on the outside of doors that people like you kept locked. The room went still. For the first time, Chloe's real pain showed through her ambition, but real pain did not absolve chosen damage. Isabella breathed slowly. I believe you have been left on the outside many times, but you did not try to open your own door. You tried to push me out of mine. Chloe looked as if she had been slapped, though no one had touched her. That was worse than any public humiliation. Mark stood up, not to defend Chloe, but because he could no longer bear to sit in front of the consequences. Enough, the word came out. Chloe turned to him desperately. You are going to let her destroy me. He stared at her with bitter sadness. You helped destroy what I was already destroying. She took a step back. You promised me a life. Mark looked at Isabella for a second, then looked away. I promised things to a lot of people while lying to myself. Eleanor stiffened hearing her son expose a weakness in front of everyone. Mark. He ignored his mother. Chloe, you are no longer going to have access to the company, the penthouse, family events, or any information connected to me. Chloe let out an incredulous laugh. So that is it. She signed some papers and you throw me away. Isabella felt the sentence touch a cruel irony. Chloe was now tasting the same mechanism she had helped feed. Mark removing someone from the stage because their presence now threatened his order. The difference was that Isabella felt no triumph. She felt only the confirmation that this man still needed to learn not to treat people like chess pieces. Helen resumed the meeting before the scene turned exactly into the spectacle. Isabella refused. The proposed measures can be signed today or taken for review, but the freezes are already in effect. Mark's lawyer muttered that he would need to review a few points. Greg stated that financially it was best to accept the separation of liabilities immediately to contain risks. Ryan agreed, surprising his mother. It is the bare minimum. We cannot keep using her name while pretending she is the problem. Eleanor shot her youngest son a cutting look, but found no support. For the first time, the matriarch realized her authority no longer covered all the holes. Mark picked up his pen. His hands were steady but his face was not. Before signing he looked at Isabella. This is the end. She held his gaze. It is the end of you deciding for me. He nodded slowly as if every word cost him. He signed the first page, then the second, then the third. The sound of the pen on paper seemed too small for so much wreckage, but Isabella knew that great prisons are also dismantled with discreet noises. Chloe left before the official end. She did not excuse herself. The door slammed hard enough to make Eleanor flinch with irritation, not pity. Mark did not follow her. That was the first concrete, minimal, insufficient, and yet real gesture Isabella saw from him. But she did not confuse it with redemption. Redemption was not letting a mistress walk out of a room. Redemption would be living afterward without needing to place someone else in a lesser seat to feel in control. When the meeting ended, Greg gathered the documents carefully, and Helen packed the signed copies. Eleanor approached Isabella near the window. For a few seconds, the two women looked out at the city without looking at each other. You were always tougher than you looked, the mother-in-law said. Isabella answered, "No, I just stopped softening myself to fit." Eleanor did not apologize. Perhaps she still did not know how. She only said, "The family will survive." Isabella looked at her. "So will I. That is the part you all failed to calculate." The matriarch received the sentence in silence, and in that silence there was more respect than in all their previous Sunday brunches combined. Mark waited until everyone had left before approaching. The room, now nearly empty, felt larger. Isabella was putting her pen in her purse when he stopped 2 steps away, keeping his distance like someone who had learned a new rule. "Too late. I read the emails," he said. She did not answer immediately. He continued. "The reports you sent, the messages about the assets, even the invitations where you asked if you should go with me. I found it all." Isabella zipped her purse and he swallowed hard. "I wanted to say I did not see them, but I did. I just did not consider them important." His honesty arrived without beauty, harsh and delayed. Isabella felt her eyes burn, but did not let the tears decide for her. "Thank you for not turning your guilt into an excuse." He looked stricken. "I do not know how to fix it." She looked at the city behind him. "Maybe start by accepting that some things cannot be fixed back to the way they were. Some are acknowledged so they never repeat." Mark seemed smaller, not humiliated but human. "Do you hate me?" The question was almost childish. Isabella took a deep breath. "No, but I do not trust you anymore, and today that matters more." The sentence hovered between them with the exact weight of truth. Mark wanted to ask for a chance, to ask for time, to ask her to see the remorseful man beginning to surface under the ruins of the arrogant husband. But for the first time, he understood that asking could also be a form of pressure, so he did not ask. He just said, "I am going to remove Chloe from the company and review everything with Greg. Without using your name, without your signature, without your shadow." Isabella watched him, looking for the old trick, the easy promise, the performative gesture. She did not find it. She found exhaustion, maybe shame, maybe a beginning. "Do it because it is right, not because you want me to come back." He lowered his eyes. "I do not know how to separate one from the other yet." The sincere answer hurt less than the old lies. Isabella walked to the door. Before leaving, she stopped and said, "Then learn it away from me." Mark did not stop her. The door closed slowly, and that absence chosen by her held more authority than any order he had ever given. In the hallway, Helen waited with the documents under her arm. "You were more generous than most would be," she said. Isabella shook her head. "Do not confuse boundaries with generosity. I just did not want to carry their trash with me." They got into the elevator together. As the doors began to close, Isabella saw Mark through the glass wall of the office, standing in front of the table, surrounded by signed papers and empty chairs. She did not feel victory. She felt grief, but it was a grief that cleared a path. On the ground floor, her driver was waiting. This time, she did not walk to the back seat. She walked to the front passenger door, stopped for a moment, then smiled faintly to herself and walked around to the driver's side. The man looked confused. "Do you want to drive, ma'am?" She reached out her hand. "I do." He handed over the keys without arguing. Isabella got in, adjusted the seat, fixed the mirror, and placed her hands on the steering wheel. 10th Avenue was crowded, slow, full of honking and rush. Even so, when she started the engine, she felt something she had not felt in years. It was not control over everything, it was direction, and that was enough. That night, Chloe sent one last message to Mark. "You are going to regret choosing a woman who destroyed you." He read it sitting alone in the hotel apartment without replying. Then he deleted her contact, not as a heroic gesture, but like someone finally closing a window through which he himself had let the storm in. Then he opened Isabella's old emails again. There was one from 3 years ago with the subject line "About us." He had never replied. He read it now. There was no accusation. It was a request. "Mark, I do not want to win arguments. I want to feel that there is still a place for me by your side." He covered his face with his hands. And this time, the regret did not come with anger toward her. It came pure, humiliating, and deserved. On the other side of the city, Isabella parked in front of a small short-term rental in the West Village. She went up alone, took off her shoes, and left the keys on the table. Before sleeping, she received a confirmation from Helen. All essential freezes were active, the documents signed, the risks contained. Isabella looked out the window at the lit-up New York skyline and breathed. For the first time, the city did not feel like a place where she had been abandoned. It felt like an open road. In the first week after the signing, Isabella learned that freedom did not arrive like the final scene of a movie with loud music and wind in her hair. It arrived in small, almost unglamorous tasks. Changing passwords, picking out a new bed, answering messages without apologizing for existing, deciding what to eat for dinner, without calculating if Mark would come home irritated. The temporary apartment in the West Village was smaller than anywhere she had lived in recent years. Yet, there was something immense in that living room, with its simple sofa, light wood table, and a window overlooking the city breathing between buildings, wires, and lights. She woke up early, made coffee, reviewed documents with Helen, and then walked to a co-working space in Tribeca. There she began to reopen. A project Mark had called a hobby, a wealth reorganization consulting firm, for women who had been pushed out of their own financial decisions. On the first day, while filling out a registration form, she hesitated at the marital status field. She did not cry, she simply wrote in the process of divorce and realized the phrase did not diminish her. It just explained a crossing. Mark, on the other hand, discovered that losing Isabella did not just mean sleeping without her. It meant finding her absence in places where her presence used to be so quiet it felt like furniture. The finance team demanded contract reviews. Greg temporarily assumed more autonomy. Ryan started questioning decisions he used to accept in silence, and Eleanor, for the first time in many years, had to call people offering explanations instead of orders. Chloe vanished from the events where she used to circulate as the promised replacement, but she left enough of a trail for doors to close before she even tried to reopen them. Some social friends, as quick to flatter as they were to abandon, started treating her as a liability. Mark received 2 messages from her in the first week, 3 in the second, none in the third. He did not miss her. He felt ashamed of having confused the thrill of being desired with love. On a Friday night, he went back to the Upper East Side penthouse just to retrieve some authorized items. The doorman, Robert, opened the entrance with formality, and Mark, crossing the lobby he had once walked through as an owner, felt the weight of being a visitor. Inside the apartment, everything looked more honest without Chloe and without parties. The furniture chosen by Isabella, the books he had never asked if she read, the plants she took care of even when he said she had no time, a mug forgotten in the back of a cabinet with her initial engraved on it. Mark found in an office drawer an old notebook with a gray cover. It was not a diary, it was notes on ideas, accounts, and plans for the project he had dismissed with an absent-minded kiss on the forehead, and a phrase that now made him sick. "You can look at this later, honey. Now is not the time." He flipped through pages where Isabella drew strategies, names of potential clients, observations about women who did not understand their own contracts, because their husband said it was better that way. He sat on the floor surrounded by a life he had ignored, and understood that his wife had not become strong after leaving. She was already strong. He had just preferred to call her quiet, so he would not have to acknowledge her intelligence. That night, before leaving, he left his key on the counter and sent a short text to Helen. "Not Isabella. I only took what was authorized. The key is in the kitchen." Helen showed the message to Isabella the next morning over coffee at an elegant, quiet bakery in Tribeca. "He is trying to behave," the lawyer said in a neutral tone. Isabella stirred her black coffee, watching the dark foam swirl. "Behaving is not changing," Helen smiled slightly. "I did not say it was." Isabella took a deep breath. There were days when she missed Mark in an irritating way. Not the man who humiliated her, but the man who sometimes appeared in flashes early in their marriage. The one who cooked badly and laughed at himself. The one who got nervous before important meetings. The one who once held her hand during a storm in the Hamptons and said he felt less competitive when he was with her. She hated remembering that, because a good memory, when mixed with a wound, could become a trap. "Did he ask to see me?" she asked. Helen closed her folder. "He did. He said he does not want to discuss the divorce. He wants to apologize in person." Isabella looked out the window at people rushing across the street. Every man who loses control discovers beautiful words. Helen did not disagree, and every woman who regains control gets to choose whether to listen or not. Isabella sat in silence for a long moment. "I will listen one time." They scheduled the meeting at a coffee shop in Tribeca right in the middle of the afternoon. No private room, no family table, no corporate office, no car waiting outside as a threat. Isabella arrived early, not out of anxiety, but because she liked choosing her own seat. She sat near the window, facing the entrance, and ordered sparkling water. When Mark walked in, she noticed he looked different in a way that did not try to look handsome. His beard was trimmed, his jacket simple, no aggressive cologne, no flashy watch on his wrist. He was still Mark Brooks. He still carried the body of someone trained to take up space, but there was a new caution in his steps. He stopped in front of the table and did not sit down. "May I?" he asked. The word almost hurt. Isabella gestured to the chair. "You may?" He sat down without leaning fully against the backrest, as if he knew he was not there to relax. For a few seconds they listened to the clatter of cups, low conversations, the espresso machine. Mark looked at her and said, "I did not come to ask you to come back." Isabella held his gaze. "Good, because I did not come to be convinced." He nodded, accepting the first boundary without trying to negotiate it. "I came to say I am sorry, but I know that phrase on its own is small. I am sorry I put Chloe in the front seat. I am sorry I did not correct her when she said you were a wife only on paper. I am sorry for every brunch where I let my mother belittle you with elegance. I am sorry I read your emails too late. And I am sorry that for years I called your pain drama so I would not have to call my behavior cruelty." Isabella felt her throat tighten, but she did not look away. The old part of her wanted to ease his guilt, to say it was okay, that only the future mattered now. The new woman, or perhaps the true woman, remained quiet. Mark ran his hand along his water glass without drinking. "I started therapy." She blinked in surprise despite trying not to show it. He continued, "I am not saying this to score points. I am saying it because Greg told me I treat people as extensions of my own fear. I got angry at him, then I realized it was true." Isabella spoke quietly. "You also treated love as property." Mark nodded. Yes, the conversation did not cure anything in that instant, but for the first time, it no longer wounded. Mark shared that Chloe had tried reaching out to Eleanor, then Ryan, then some social contacts, but lost her leverage when the internal logs proved her curiosity was strategic. She was not destroyed publicly, she was just no longer protected in silence. Eleanor, too proud to apologize outright, had sent a formal message through Helen, acknowledging that Isabella's financial boundaries would be respected. Isabella almost laughed when she heard that. "Your mother apologizes like someone recording meeting minutes." Mark smiled a sad smile for the first time. "It is the maximum amount of humanity she can muster without passing out." The brief humor vanished right after. "She also asked if you would accept a dinner invitation someday. I told her I would not bring that request to you." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "And yet you brought it." He shook his head. "I brought it as information, not as pressure. You never have to step foot in that house again." Isabella looked out at the street. The word never was strong, sometimes necessary. "I still do not know what I want to do with that part of my life." Mark answered. "You do not have to know today." It was a simple sentence, perhaps the most generous one he had ever given her. Weeks passed. The divorce process moved forward without a spectacle because Isabella refused invisible invitations to turn her pain into headlines. Some people in Manhattan's elite tried to extract details at discreet events with questions coded in fake concern. She learned to smile and answer, "I am well taken care of legally and emotionally." The sentence shut down conversations. Her consulting firm, Clear Horizon, started with 3 clients referred by Helen, then 5. Then a meeting with a support organization for female entrepreneurs. Isabella discovered a strange joy in explaining clauses, asking questions no one had asked these women. Seeing them straighten their spines as they realized their financial ignorance was often manufactured by those who profited from it. On a rainy morning, leaving a meeting in Midtown, she stopped on the exact same sidewalk where she had gotten out of Mark's car. Helen's building was there, the crosswalk, the flow of traffic, the loud living noise of the city. For a second, the memory returned completely. Chloe in the front seat, Mark ordering the door shut, clutching the folder against her chest. Isabella closed her eyes. When she opened them, she did not see defeat. She saw a milestone. Some women had wedding albums. She had a sidewalk where she was reborn. Mark changed too, but not in a cinematic way. He temporarily lost his executive presidency to a governance committee suggested by Greg and approved by Ryan. At first, he felt it as a humiliation. Then, as a consequence, he started working in a smaller office, without the privileged view, reviewing processes he used to delegate with arrogance. He apologized to Greg. He apologized to Lauren for ignoring her discomfort around Chloe. He tried to apologize to his mother for allowing her to run his marriage as if it were a branch of the company. But Eleanor replied that he was being dramatic. This time, Mark did not back down. "It is not drama, Mother, that is just the name we give to other people's pain when it gets in the way of our convenience." Eleanor fell silent. Maybe it was the start of something. Maybe not. At night, Mark drove himself. He no longer used a driver for short trips. At stoplights, he sometimes looked at the empty passenger seat and remembered that the problem had never been who sat there. The problem was him, thinking he had the right to decide a woman's worth by the seat he offered. The divorce was finalized months later with no public war. On the day of the final signature, Isabella and Mark met again at Helen's office. The lawyer kept it formal, explained the final terms, and made it clear that everything was proceeding as agreed. There was no vulgar dispute, no dramatic reconciliation across the desk. There were two adults standing before the ruins of what they had not known how to protect. When Isabella signed, she felt a pinch in her chest, but she did not hesitate. Mark signed next and spent a few seconds staring at her name on the document. "I wish it had been different," he said. Isabella capped the pen. "I do too, but wishing afterward does not change what we allowed before." He accepted it. As they left, Helen stayed behind, giving them a few feet of hallway. Mark stopped near the elevator. "Are you happy?" The question could have been invasive, but it came without demands. Isabella thought about it. "I am learning not to call peace loneliness." He breathed as if that touched him more than he expected. "You deserve peace." She looked at him. "I know that is the difference." That night, Isabella officially launched her consulting firm in a small office with light walls, modest flowers, and a simple sign, "Clear Horizon." She invited a few people: Helen, Lauren, 2 clients, an old college professor, and surprisingly Ryan, who showed up with a bouquet and sincere awkwardness. Mark was not invited. He heard from his sister-in-law that the event had been beautiful, and he did not complain. He stayed home, opened a bottle of sparkling water, not wine, and wrote a letter. He did not send in it. He did not ask her to come back. He only thanked her for leaving before they both became permanently unrecognizable people. Isabella, during a short toast, spoke without a microphone, without a stage, without the intention of going viral through pain. Many women do not need someone to give them a seat. They just need to stop accepting the seat that diminishes them. Helen smiled. Lauren wiped away a discreet tear. Outside, New York kept running loud, unequal, brilliant, and hard. Inside that room, however, there was a new kind of silence. Not the silence of submission, but the silence of some can finally breathe. Months later, Isabella ran into Mark by chance at the same coffee shop in Tribeca. She was walking out of a meeting, holding a blue folder and the keys to her own car. He was sitting alone reading a book that, judging by the cover, was about family dynamics and emotional regulation. Seeing her, he stood up but did not step too close. "Hi, Isabella." She smiled lightly. "Hi, Mark." There was no Chloe. There was no Eleanor. There were no lawyers. There was no debt hanging between them in that minute. There was history and boundaries. He asked how the consulting firm was doing. She said it was growing slowly, the right way. He said he had stepped away from the presidency for a while, and that although difficult, it was doing him good. The conversation lasted a few minutes with no promises. As they said goodbye, Mark looked at the street. "Are you driving?" She held up the keys. And he smiled with sadness and respect. "It suits you." Isabella accepted the sentence without turning it into an invitation. "Take care, Mark," he replied. "You too." And this time, neither tried to hold the other in the wrong place. Isabella walked out onto the sidewalk, where the late afternoon sun turned the buildings golden and the traffic began to thicken. Her car was parked a few yards away. She unlocked the door, got into the driver's seat, and sat still for a moment, looking at the steering wheel under her hands. She remembered the night on Park Avenue, the back seat, Mark's voice saying it was just a seat. Chloe smiling in the mirror. She also remembered herself opening the door, stepping onto the pavement, and choosing to disappear properly. She smiled now without bitterness, because she had not disappeared. She had only stepped out of the line of sight of someone who did not know how to see. She started the car, adjusted the mirror, and saw her own face, more serene, more adult, less willing to confuse love with permission. On the radio, a low song filled the silence. Before pulling into the avenue, she received a message from Helen. "First speaking engagement confirmed for next month," Isabella replied. "Let us keep moving forward." Then she merged into the New York traffic in no rush to arrive at a perfect life. It was enough that it was hers. On the other side of the coffee shop glass, Mark watched her leave. He did not chase after her. That was perhaps his greatest gesture of delayed love, allowing her to go without turning her departure into another competition. He sat back down, opened his book, but took a while to read. He thought about the front seat, the back seat, all the places he had handed out as if people were pieces of furniture in a room. He thought that maybe he would never get Isabella back, and that accepting this was the first decent thing he was doing for her. When he finally looked down at the page, his cell phone vibrated with a message from Eleanor asking if he would come to Sunday brunch. He replied, "I will, but not to pretend everything is fine." His mother left him on read and did not reply. Mark almost smiled. Outside, Isabella kept driving, small among the cars, buses, and lights, but whole in a way he had never known how to allow. And the city that, on that night of pain, witnessed her exit, now witnessed something else. A woman who did not need to occupy anyone's front seat because she had finally chosen her own direction. 6 months after the divorce, Isabella learned that starting over did not mean erasing Mark, Chloe, or the Brooks family from her memory. It meant remembering without bleeding from the same wound again. The consulting firm, Clear Horizon, had grown more than she expected. It was not a massive corporation, nor did it take up an entire floor in Hudson Yards. But it had something none of the Brooks family's drawing rooms ever had. Women walking in with fear and walking out with their shoulders slightly less hunched. Isabella helped wives, widows, daughters of businessmen, small entrepreneurs, and even women from traditional families who for years had signed documents without understanding what they were giving away. Whenever one of them said, "I feel invisible," Isabella took a deep breath because she knew that word from the inside. That morning, she was invited to give a talk at a boutique auditorium in Manhattan. The theme was simple but powerful: autonomy, dignity, and choices within relationships. Helen Carter was in the front row, proud like someone watching a wound turn into a tool. Lauren also showed up discreetly, bringing white flowers and an apology that did not come as a speech, but in the form of presents. Isabella walked onto the stage without a flashy dress, without exaggerated jewelry, without trying to look invincible. She wore a light pantsuit and held only a few sheets of notes. When she looked at the audience, she saw many women in silence. Some had tired eyes, others had their hands gripping their purses tight. Isabella recognized that gesture. It was the gesture of someone who still carried documents, fears, and excuses all in the same space. She began without drama. "For a long time, I thought love was staying. Then I discovered that sometimes self-love is knowing how to leave. The auditorium went quiet. It was not an empty silence. It was an attentive silence full of untold stories. Isabella continued, "Many people think a humiliation needs to be massive to justify a break. But sometimes the soul does not break in a scandal. It wears down in small scenes. A chair that is never offered, a meeting you are excluded from, a joke everyone pretends not to hear, a back seat where they tell you to sit, as if your place is always an afterthought." She stopped for a moment, because her own voice almost cracked. But it did not crack. "On the night I asked to get out of the car, I was not running away. I was coming back to myself." In the back of the auditorium, Mark listened without moving. He had not told anyone he was coming. He bought the ticket under another name, sat in the very last row, and promised himself he would not approach if his presence bothered her. He was not there to be forgiven. He was there to bear witness, perhaps for the first time, without trying to be the center of attention. When Isasa spoke of the back seat, Mark felt the shame pierce his chest like something deserved but different from before. He did not turn the shame into anger. He just lowered his eyes and accepted it. Next to him, an older woman wrote down quotes in a notebook. Down in front, a young woman wiped away discreet tears. Mark understood belatedly that Isabella's pain had never been small. What was small was his perspective. After the talk, a few women approached Isabella. One of them, in a blue dress and a trembling voice, said, "My husband decides everything because he says I do not understand money." Isabella held her hands carefully. "Then the first step is not to fight, it is to learn. Knowledge gives you back your voice even before it gives you back your courage." Another woman asked if leaving was always the solution. Isabella answered honestly, "No, every story has its path, but staying can never mean disappearing." Helen, listening nearby, smiled with contained emotion. That was the difference between revenge and transformation. Revenge would have ended with Mark's downfall. Transformation started right there, when Isabella's story ceased to be just a wound and became a bridge for other women. When the auditorium emptied, Mark stayed near the exit. Isabella saw him. She did not jump. She did not harden. She did not smile like before. She just walked over to him with serenity. "You came," she said. Mark kept his hands in front of him without trying to touch her. "I came to listen. I did not come to ask for anything." She nodded. "And what did you hear?" He took a deep breath. "That I spent years calling everything that was destroying you an overreaction." Isabella held his gaze. There was pain there, but no dependency. There was memory, but no prison. Mark continued, "I also heard that you turned the worst day of your life into something that helps other people. I never would have had that kind of greatness." Isabella answered, "Take it easy. Greatness is not born ready. Sometimes it shows up when we refuse to stay small inside someone else's story." They stood in silence for a few seconds. Outside, the streets of Manhattan kept moving. Crowded, alive, impatient. Mark looked at the street, then at her. "I still miss you." Isabella did not look away. "I know." He almost smiled, a sad smile. "But I am not going to use that to pull you back." For the first time she saw in him a form of respect that did not need to be announced. "That is good, Mark." He nodded. "I am learning late." Isabella picked up her purse from a table. Learning late is still better than continuing to pretend there is no lesson. They walked together toward the exit, but not as a couple. As two people who had shared a love, a ruin, and a consequence. On the sidewalk, Mark asked if she wanted him to call her a car. Isabella held up her own keys. "I drove here." He smiled faintly. "Of course you did." She unlocked the car, put her bag on the passenger seat, and stopped before getting in. For a moment, they both looked at that empty seat. Neither of them said anything, but they both understood. That place was no longer a trophy, a dispute, or a symbol of humiliation. It was just a seat. Isabella's worth was never tied to it. Mark took a step back. "Good night, Isabella," she replied. "Good night, Mark." Then she got in the car, adjusted the mirror, and started the engine. She did not look back immediately, not out of pride, but because she no longer needed to confirm if he was watching. For the first time in many years, being seen ceased to be an urgent necessity. As she drove through Manhattan, Isabella felt the city go by in lights, noises, and movement. Life was not perfect. There were difficult days, unexpected memories, paperwork to resolve, nights when the loneliness hit harder. But now she knew one thing that no one could take away. Getting out of the backseat did not mean defeating someone. It meant no longer abandoning herself. At a red light, she received a message from Helen. "You were brilliant today." Isabella smiled and replied, "I was truthful. Today, that is enough." When the light turned green, she moved forward. Not as someone's wife, not as someone's ex, not as a humiliated woman who made a comeback to prove her worth. Just as Isabella, whole, imperfect, free, and finally steering her own direction. This story holds educational and entertainment value as it speaks to dignity within a romantic relationship. The drama of the front seat and the back seat is not merely about jealousy or infidelity. It is a metaphor for position, respect, and emotional invisibility. Many people remain in relationships where they are gradually diminished by small gestures, cold remarks, and repeated exclusions. The story demonstrates that humiliation does not always arrive in massive scandals. Sometimes it resides in details that everyone pretends not to see. The educational goal of the narrative is to serve as a reminder that love should not demand self-reras. A healthy relationship requires respect, listening, partnership, and acknowledgement. Isabella does not become strong by destroying Mark or Chloe. She becomes strong because she chooses to protect herself, seek legal counsel, reclaim her autonomy, and stop accepting a position that diminished her. The central message is that walking away from a painful situation does not have to be an act of revenge. It can be an act of lucidity. From an entertainment perspective, the story utilizes elements of modern American drama. A marriage in crisis, New York's elite, family conflicts, an ambitious mistress, a battle for image and assets, and regret. These elements build tension, emotion, and curiosity for the audience. However, the focus is not simply on defeating the mistress or making the husband suffer. The focus is the protagonist's transformation. The audience follows a woman who begins by being treated as invisible and ends up choosing her own direction. The narrative also illustrates that regret does not erase consequences. Mark changes, but that change does not obligate Isabella to return. This is important because many narratives romanticize apologies as though they fix everything. Here, forgiveness is not automatic, and reconciliation is not handed out as a prize. The true victory is Isabella reclaiming her voice, her space, and her peace. Therefore, this is a story of drama, resilience, and emotional awareness. It entertains with tension, twists, and powerful scenes. But it also educates by showing that no one should accept being constantly placed in the background just to maintain the appearance of a marriage. The core lesson is simple. When a relationship turns someone into a shadow, choosing to walk away might be the first step to existing